Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. Blake Morrison stood in his kitchen, watching the morning sun filter through the pristine windows of his suburban home. At 38, he maintained the disciplined physique of his military years, though most people who knew him now saw only a successful private security consultant living the American dream. His wife Trinity hummed softly as she prepared coffee, her blonde hair catching the light in a way that once made his heart race. 15 years of Special Forces operations in classified locations had taught Blake to read people like open books. He could detect lies in micro-expressions, sense danger in environmental changes, and eliminate threats with surgical precision. Yet somehow, he had chosen to ignore the subtle signs that had been accumulating for months. Trinity's late-night phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room. The new lingerie that never made an appearance in their bedroom. The way she avoided eye contact during intimate conversations. The expensive gifts she claimed were from her marketing job, despite him knowing her exact salary. "I'll be visiting my parents this weekend," Trinity announced, not looking up from her phone. "The house needs some maintenance work, and Dad's back is acting up again." Blake nodded, spooning eggs onto his plate. Frank and Dorothy Ashford had always treated him with polite distance, never quite accepting their daughter's choice to marry a man from Blake's blue-collar background. The old Victorian house on Elm Street had been Trinity's childhood home before her parents moved to a retirement community in Florida 2 years ago. "Need any help? I could drive up with you," Blake offered, though he knew the answer. "No, it's fine. Just boring family stuff. Besides, you have that Patterson security consultation this weekend." She was right about the consultation, but Blake found it curious how well Trinity tracked his schedule lately, almost as if she were ensuring she knew when he'd be unavailable. After Trinity left that Friday afternoon, Blake completed the Patterson job, a comprehensive security overhaul for a tech executive who'd receive credible threats. The work was routine, but it kept his tactical skills sharp. Blake had learned long ago that complacency could be fatal. By Saturday evening, an inexplicable restlessness had settled over him. His instincts, honed by years of dangerous operations, were sending subtle warnings he couldn't ignore. Something felt wrong about Trinity's story. On impulse, Blake drove to the Ashford house on Elm Street. He told himself he was being paranoid, that marriage counseling might be a better solution than surveillance. But as he turned onto the quiet street lined with mature oak trees, his training took over. The house sat dark and imposing against the night sky, its Victorian gingerbread trim casting intricate shadows in the moonlight. Blake parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, moving with the silent precision that had kept him alive in hostile territories. The front door was locked, but Blake had learned lock-picking from a former CIA operative during a joint mission in Afghanistan. The skill proved useful now as he slipped inside the dusty interior. The house smelled of neglect and something else, something that made Blake's combat instincts flare to life. Following the scent, he climbed the creaking stairs to the second floor. The smell grew stronger as he approached the master bedroom. Blake pushed open the door and froze. A young woman, maybe 25, was handcuffed to the ornate brass bed frame. Her auburn hair was matted, her clothes dirty and torn. She looked up at Blake with eyes that held both terror and desperate hope. A strip of duct tape covered her mouth. Blake's military training kicked in instantly. He scanned the room for threats, confirmed they were alone, then approached the girl slowly to avoid frightening her further. "I'm here to help," he whispered, carefully removing the tape from her mouth. "Are you hurt?" "Please," she gasped, her voice hoarse. "They said they'd kill me if I screamed. I've been here for 3 days." Blake examined the handcuffs, professional grade, not something purchased at a novelty store. "Who did this to you?" "A woman with blonde hair and a man with a scar on his neck. They knew things about me. Personal things. They said I needed to disappear for a while." Blake's blood turned to ice. Trinity had blonde hair, and she'd mentioned a new friend from her yoga class, someone named Victor who had a distinctive scar from a motorcycle accident. With hands that barely trembled, Blake called Trinity's number. "Hey, baby." Her voice came through the speaker, cheerful and normal. "How's your evening?" "I'm at your parents' house," Blake said carefully. "I was worried about you working here alone." The silence stretched for several heartbeats. When Trinity spoke again, her tone had changed completely. "We don't live there anymore, Blake. Why would you go there?" The line went dead. Blake stared at his phone, then at the terrified young woman handcuffed to the bed. In that moment, he realized his marriage had been a carefully constructed lie, and he was about to discover just how deep the deception ran. Chapter 2: Shadows of Truth. Blake worked quickly to free the young woman, using a paperclip to pick the handcuff locks, another skill from his covert operations days. As the metal restraints clicked open, she rubbed her wrists and struggled to sit up. "What's your name?" Blake asked, helping her to the edge of the bed. "Iris Novak," she whispered. "I'm a journalist with the Metro Herald. I was investigating." God, this is going to sound crazy. "Try me." Iris looked at Blake intently, as if measuring whether she could trust him. "I was investigating a human trafficking network operating through legitimate businesses. High-end escorts, forced labor, the works. The trail led me to a marketing firm downtown, Prestige Communications." Blake's stomach dropped. That was Trinity's company. 3 days ago, I was leaving the office after a meeting with a source when these two people approached me in the parking garage. The woman said she knew I'd been asking questions about her business. Before I could react, the man injected something into my neck. Blake helped Iris to her feet, noting she was steady despite her ordeal. "You said they knew personal things about you. Details only someone with access to police databases or government records would know. My social security number, my sister's address in Oregon, the fact that my parents died in a car accident when I was 16. Iris's voice strengthened as she spoke. "This isn't some random crime, Mr. Morrison." "Blake Morrison." He watched her reaction carefully. Iris's eyes widened. "Morrison? Are you married to Trinity Morrison from Prestige Communications?" "Yes." "Then you're in danger too. My investigation uncovered evidence that someone at Prestige has been using the company's client database to identify and target vulnerable women. Single mothers, recent immigrants, women with no family ties. They promise high-paying jobs, then force them into situations they can't escape." Blake's mind raced through the implications. Trinity's expensive gifts, her secretive phone calls, her precise knowledge of his schedule. How long has this been going on? At least 2 years, possibly longer. But here's the thing. The operation is too sophisticated for amateurs. Someone with serious resources and connections is running this. Blake helped Iris down the stairs, his military paranoia now in full operation mode. "We need to get you to safety and figure out our next move." "I can't go to the police," Iris said urgently. "Part of my investigation revealed that someone inside the police department is feeding information to the traffickers. That's how they stay ahead of any investigations." As they reached the front door, Blake's phone buzzed with a text message from Trinity. "Blake, I know you're confused. Meet me at Murphy's Diner on Highway 9 tomorrow at noon. I can explain everything." Blake showed the message to Iris. "She's trying to control the situation," she said immediately. "That's classic predator behavior. When confronted, they try to regain control through manipulation." "Murphy's Diner," Blake mused. "It's isolated, only one road in and out. Easy to monitor who's coming and going." "You're not actually going to meet her?" Blake's expression hardened, the soldier in him emerging. "Oh, I'm going, but not the way she expects." Blake drove Iris to a safe house he maintained, an unremarkable apartment downtown that he'd kept from his military days, unknown to Trinity or anyone else. It was stocked with cash, weapons, surveillance equipment, and everything needed to disappear or conduct operations. "This is where you'll stay until we sort this out," Blake told Iris as he activated the security system. "The building has facial recognition cameras, and I'll know if anyone approaches." Iris examined the apartment's sophisticated security setup. "You're not just a security consultant, are you?" "I used to solve problems for the government, the kind that don't exist in official records." Over the next several hours, Blake and Iris pieced together the scope of the operation. Using his contacts and private intelligence, Blake accessed records that painted a disturbing picture. Prestige Communications had client files on over 300 women who fit the trafficking profile. Cross-referencing with missing persons reports revealed that at least 20 of those women had disappeared over the past 2 years. Trinity's been using her legitimate job as cover, Blake realized. She identifies targets through the marketing consultations, then feeds their information to her partner. Victor Reyes, Iris said, pulling up a file on her laptop. I managed to photograph him before they grabbed me. Former military police, dishonorably discharged for assault. Since then, he's been connected to several criminal enterprises, but nothing that stuck in court. Blake studied Victor's photograph. The scar on his neck was prominent, and his eyes held the cold calculation Blake recognized in career criminals. Military police explains the professional handcuffs and injection technique. There's more, Iris said grimly. My source inside Prestige mentioned that Trinity and Victor have been planning something big. A final score before they disappear. Something involving a high-value target. Blake's phone buzzed again. Another text from Trinity. I love you, Blake. Whatever you think you know, you're wrong. Trust me one more time. This time, Blake responded, see you at noon tomorrow. But Blake Morrison was no longer the trusting husband. He was a hunter preparing to destroy his prey, and Trinity and Victor had no idea what kind of predator they had awakened. Chapter 3. The Trap Within the Trap. Blake spent the early morning hours conducting reconnaissance on Murphy's Diner. Located 15 miles outside the city on a rural highway, the diner sat in a valley surrounded by wooded hills. Perfect terrain for someone with Blake's training to observe and control. Using military-grade binoculars, Blake identified 3 vehicles positioned around the diner that didn't belong. A black sedan with tinted windows parked behind the building. A van with surveillance equipment barely visible through its rear windows, and a motorcycle hidden in the tree line. Victor's preferred mode of transportation based on Iris's intelligence. Trinity wasn't planning to explain anything. She was planning an ambush. Blake smiled grimly. They had underestimated him completely. By 11:30, Blake was positioned on a ridge overlooking the diner, wearing tactical gear and carrying enough firepower to handle a small army. Through his scope, he watched Trinity enter the diner and take a booth with clear sight lines to the entrance. She kept checking her phone nervously. At exactly noon, Blake's phone rang. Where are you? Trinity's voice was strained. I'm here waiting. I'm watching you, Blake replied calmly. Along with Victor in the sedan, 2 more men in the van, and someone on the motorcycle. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? The silence stretched for 10 seconds. Blake, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You and Victor have been trafficking women for at least 2 years. You used your job to identify targets, and he handled the kidnapping and disposal. You kept me around as cover, the respectable husband who provided legitimacy. That's not. Iris Novak told me everything. Blake interrupted. She's safe, by the way. Your plan to silence her failed. Another long pause. When Trinity spoke again, her voice had changed completely, cold and calculating. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Blake. Victor has connections you can't imagine. People in law enforcement, in government. If you interfere with our business, you'll disappear just like the others. Interesting threat from someone who's about to find out what 15 years of Black Ops training actually means. Blake ended the call and began moving. His first target was the motorcycle in the tree line. The rider never saw Blake coming. One moment, he was monitoring radio chatter from a van. The next, he was unconscious from a precisely applied chokehold. Blake zip-tied the man's hands and feet, took his radio and weapons, then sabotaged the motorcycle's engine. The van was parked on a service road behind the diner. Blake approached from the vehicle's blind spot, using skills learned in urban warfare environments. Through the van's rear window, he could see 2 men monitoring electronic surveillance equipment. Blake attached a small explosive device to the van's fuel tank. Not enough to kill, but sufficient to disable the vehicle and create chaos. He set the timer for 3 minutes, then moved toward the sedan. Victor Reyes was exactly where Blake expected him to be, positioned behind the diner with a clear view of the front entrance. The former military police officer was well trained, but he was focused on watching for Blake to arrive, not on defending against an attack from behind. Blake's approach was silent and professional. He disabled Victor with a combat knife, placed precisely at the base of his skull, applying just enough pressure to penetrate skin without causing permanent damage. "Move, and I'll sever your spinal cord," Blake whispered. Victor froze completely. "Blake, are you safe?" "For now." "What did you find?" Trinity's computer files contain a complete client database with over 400 women. But that's not the worst part. I found financial records showing payments to law enforcement officials, court personnel, even someone in the FBI. Blake closed his eyes, absorbing the scope of the corruption. "How high does it go?" Deputy Director Charles Brennan has been receiving monthly payments of $50,000. "Blake, this network has protection at the federal level." Blake looked back at Trinity and Victor, who were watching him intently. "Then the official channels are compromised. We'll have to handle this differently." "What do you mean?" "I mean some problems require permanent solutions." Blake ended the call and returned to the booth. Trinity and Victor had been whispering urgently, but fell silent as he approached. "Good news," Blake announced. "My journalist friend has found evidence of your entire network, including your corrupt protectors. Bad news for you is that the corruption goes so high that normal legal channels can't be trusted." Victor sneered. "So you're stuck. You can't turn us in without risking your precious evidence disappearing." "Actually," Blake said, settling back into his seat, "it just means I'm free to handle this my way." Blake pulled out his phone and showed them a series of photographs he'd taken during his reconnaissance. The disabled surveillance van, the unconscious operatives, the sabotaged motorcycle. "You see, the beautiful thing about having your entire support network compromised is that no one will investigate too closely when you disappear. Your corrupt cops will assume you left town to avoid exposure. Your government contacts will be too busy covering their own tracks to look for you." Trinity's face went pale. "Blake, you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life," Blake replied. "You've enslaved innocent women, murdered journalists, and corrupted the justice system. You think you deserve to live after that?" Victor lunged across the table, but Blake was ready. The former Special Forces operative moved with lethal precision, grabbing Victor's throat and slamming him back into his seat. "Try that again, and I'll demonstrate what a collapsed windpipe sounds like," Blake said calmly. He looked at Trinity, seeing the full scope of her evil for the first time. "I loved you. I trusted you. I built my life around you. And you used all of that to cover your crimes against innocent people." "Blake, please." "The woman I married doesn't exist," Blake continued. "She was just a mask worn by a monster. And monsters need to be put down." Blake stood up, his decision made. Trinity and Victor had corrupted the system designed to bring them to justice. That left only one option. It was time for Blake Morrison to return to what he did best, eliminating threats to innocent people. Chapter 5. The Hunter's Preparation. Blake zip-tied Trinity and Victor to their booth seats, ensuring they couldn't escape while he prepared for what came next. From his vehicle, he retrieved a duffel bag containing specialized equipment from his military days, items he'd hoped never to use again. "What are you planning?" Trinity asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Blake ignored her, methodically laying out his tools on the table. Zip ties, duct tape, tactical restraints, and a selection of implements designed for information extraction. "This is insane," Victor said, but his bravado was gone now. "You're talking about murder. That makes you just like us." Blake looked at Victor with cold disgust. "I killed enemy combatants who were trying to harm innocent people. You enslaved innocent women for profit and murdered journalists for asking questions. We are nothing alike." Blake's phone rang. "Iris." "Blake, I've been monitoring police scanners. Multiple units are heading toward the diner. Someone must have reported the explosion. How long do I have?" "Maybe 15 minutes. Blake looked at his prisoners, then made a decision. "I'm moving them to a secure location. Continue analyzing the files. I want a complete list of victims and collaborators." "Blake, what are you planning to do?" "What should have been done years ago." Blake cut Trinity and Victor's restraints, then forced them at gunpoint toward the diner's rear exit. His vehicle, a modified SUV with reinforced windows and run-flat tires, was parked behind the building. "Where are you taking us?" Trinity demanded. "Somewhere we won't be interrupted." Blake drove deep into the mountains, following logging roads that hadn't seen traffic in years. His destination was an abandoned mining facility he'd scouted during his reconnaissance of the area. Remote, soundproof, and equipped with industrial equipment that could prove useful. The mining office building still had electricity and water, maintained by a caretaker service that Blake had used for legitimate security training exercises. No one would disturb them here. Blake secured Trinity and Victor in separate rooms, then began his interrogation. "I want a complete list of every woman you've trafficked," Blake told Victor. "Names, dates, locations. I want to know which ones are still alive and where they're being held." "Go to hell," Victor spat. Blake pulled out a device that looked like a modified car battery charger. "This is a field interrogation kit, military issue. It delivers precisely calibrated electrical impulses designed to cause maximum pain without permanent damage, unless I adjust the settings." Victor's face went pale. "I used this on Taliban commanders who were planning suicide attacks on civilian markets," Blake continued. "They always talked eventually. The question is how much pain you want to endure first." "You're bluffing. You're not a killer." Blake attached the electrodes to Victor's wrists. "I've killed 47 people in defense of innocent lives. Adding one more won't bother me." The first pulse made Victor scream and convulse against his restraints. "That was level 1, Blake said calmly. "There are 10 levels. Level 6 causes permanent nerve damage. Level 10 stops the heart." Wait. Victor gasped. "I'll tell you what you want to know." Over the next hour, Victor provided a complete breakdown of their operation. 17 women were currently being held in various locations around the city. Another 23 had been sold to clients in other states. The rest, Victor's voice broke as he admitted, had been murdered when they became too difficult to control. Blake recorded everything, his rage building with each revelation. "The clients," Blake said. "I want names and addresses." Victor hesitated, then provided a list that included politicians, business leaders, and law enforcement officials. The scope of the corruption was staggering. Blake moved to Trinity's room next. "Your turn," he said simply. Trinity tried a different approach: seduction, manipulation, appeals to their shared history. None of it worked. "You're not the woman I married," Blake told her. "That woman was a fiction created to provide cover for a monster. The monster is who you really are." When Trinity refused to cooperate, Blake applied the same techniques he'd used on Victor. She broke more quickly, providing financial records, client lists, and details about the corrupt officials who protected their operation. "The women who are still alive," Blake said. "Where are they being held?" "Good. Now we're going to have a conversation about your business model." Blake zip-tied Victor's hands behind his back and confiscated his weapons: 2 pistols, a knife, and a taser. Then he marched Victor toward the diner's rear entrance just as the van exploded in the distance. Trinity burst out of the diner at the sound of the explosion, her composure finally cracking. She stopped short when she saw Blake pushing Victor ahead of him at knife point. "Hello, Trinity," Blake said conversationally. "I think it's time we had that explanation you promised." Trinity's face cycled through fear, anger, and desperation before settling on defiance. "You can't prove anything. Whatever that journalist told you, it's her word against ours." "Actually, I can prove quite a lot." Blake produced a small recording device. "For instance, I can prove you just threatened to have me killed by Victor's government connections. I can prove you admitted to running a human trafficking operation. And I can prove you've been lying to me for years." "Blake, please." Trinity's voice took on a pleading tone. "We can work this out. The money we've made, there's enough to disappear together. Start over somewhere else." Blake studied his wife's face, seeing clearly for the first time the cold calculation behind her blue eyes. "You really think I'd become your accomplice? Help you traffic innocent women?" "You killed people in the military," Trinity shot back. "How is this different?" "I killed enemies who were trying to harm innocent people," Blake replied. "You enslaved innocent people for profit. If you can't see the difference, then you're even more lost than I thought." Victor struggled against his restraints. You have no idea what you're interfering with, Morrison. This operation has protection at levels you can't reach. Blake pressed the knife deeper, drawing a drop of blood. Keep talking. I'm recording everything. Blake, Trinity said desperately, I love you. I always have. This business, it was Victor's idea. He manipulated me, made me think we needed the money. Blake looked at his wife with disgust. Even now, you're lying. Iris's investigation shows you initiated contact with Victor, not the other way around. You recruited him because you needed someone with military skills to handle the physical aspects of the operation. Trinity's mask finally dropped completely. Fine. Yes, I started it. Yes, I used my job to find targets. And yes, I married you because a special forces husband provided perfect cover. But you know what, Blake? I don't regret any of it. Those women were weak. They allowed themselves to be victims. Blake stared at this stranger who wore his wife's face. And now you're going to face justice for what you've done to them. What justice? Trinity laughed bitterly. You think the police will believe you? Victor's right about our connections. By tomorrow, you'll be wanted for assault and kidnapping, and we'll be free. Blake smiled, a cold, predatory expression that made both Trinity and Victor take involuntary steps backward. Who said anything about involving the police? Chapter 4. The Network Revealed. Blake forced Trinity and Victor into the diner at knife point, herding them toward a back booth where they couldn't be seen from the road. The waitress, an elderly woman named Agnes, had fled when the van exploded, leaving the restaurant empty. Sit, Blake commanded, positioning himself where he could watch both the front door and his prisoners. We're going to discuss the full scope of your operation. Victor remained defiant despite the blood trickling down his neck. You're making a mistake, Morrison. People know we're here. When we don't check in. You mean like your 3 associates who are currently unconscious and zip-tied? Blake interrupted. I've already disabled your entire support team. Trinity's eyes darted between Blake and the front windows. You can't hold us here indefinitely. Someone will call the police. Let them come, Blake said calmly. I have recordings of both of you admitting to human trafficking, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder, plus physical evidence from the house on Elm Street and Iris Novak's testimony. Blake leaned forward, his voice dropping to the tone he'd used when interrogating insurgents. But I'm more interested in the scope of your network. Iris mentioned you have protection in law enforcement and government. I want names. Victor laughed harshly. You think we'd give up our protection? You're stupider than I thought. Blake pulled out his combat knife and placed it on the table between them. The blade caught the fluorescent light, its edge honed to surgical sharpness. I've extracted information from Taliban commanders and Russian intelligence operatives, Blake said conversationally. Compared to them, you two are amateurs. Trinity's bravado cracked slightly. Blake, you wouldn't. Wouldn't what? Use the same techniques I use to protect American lives overseas? The difference is, you two are actually guilty of the crimes I'm investigating. Blake's phone buzzed with a text from Iris. Found something big in Trinity's files. Call me when safe. Your journalist friend is still digging, Blake told them. She's very thorough. I suspect she's already found evidence that will implicate your entire network. Victor's jaw tightened. Novak is a problem that needs to be eliminated. Interesting choice of words, Blake said, starting the recording app on his phone. Please elaborate on how you eliminate problems. We make them disappear, Victor said coldly. Permanently, just like we're going to do with you. Trinity shot Victor a warning look, but the damage was done. Blake nodded thoughtfully. So you admit to murder. How many women have you killed, Victor? Enough to perfect the technique. Blake, stop this, Trinity pleaded. Victor doesn't know what he's saying. He's in shock from the injury. Actually, he's being very helpful, Blake replied. Keep going, Victor. Tell me about your government connections. Victor seemed to realize he was being manipulated, but his anger overrode his caution. You want to know about connections? Fine. Detective Ray Hutchins with Metro PD has been feeding us information about investigations for 18 months. He gets 20% of our profits. Anyone else? Assistant District Attorney Maria Santos helps us identify which cases to worry about and which ones will disappear. She's been very useful. Trinity looked horrified. Victor, shut up. But Victor was beyond reason now, his military training warped by years of criminal activity. And your precious Iris Novak? She's not the first journalist who got too close. We dealt with two others, a reporter from Channel 7 and a freelancer who was investigating missing persons cases. Blake felt cold fury building in his chest. Dealt with them how? The same way we deal with all problems. They went for boat rides and forgot how to swim. Blake had heard enough. These weren't just criminals. They were serial killers operating under the protection of corrupt officials. The justice system they had compromised couldn't be trusted to handle them properly. I need to make a phone call, Blake announced, standing up. Don't move. Blake walked to the front of the diner and called Iris. There's a warehouse on Industrial Boulevard, Trinity sobbed. And a house in Riverside. Blake, please, I can help you rescue them. I know where everything is. You're going to help me, Blake agreed. But not the way you think. Blake spent the evening reviewing the intelligence he gathered. 17 women held in 2 locations, guarded by at least 6 armed men. Multiple corrupt officials who would interfere with any official rescue attempt. And a client list that read like a who's who of the city's power structure. The scope of the problem was beyond what any individual could handle through legal channels. But Blake wasn't planning to use legal channels. He called Iris from a secure phone. I have intelligence on the entire operation, he told her. Locations, victim names, client lists, financial records. Everything needed to expose the network. That's incredible. We can take this to federal authorities. The corruption goes to the federal level, Blake interrupted. Deputy Director Brennan at the FBI has been taking payments. We can't trust official channels. Then what do? You're going to release everything to the media. Every major news outlet, every social media platform, every journalist in the country. Make it impossible to suppress or ignore. What about the women who are still being held? Blake looked through the window at Trinity and Victor, who were secured in the mining facilities holding cells. I'm going to rescue them. Tonight. Blake, you can't do this alone. It's too dangerous. I've conducted solo rescue operations in hostile territory before. This is what I'm trained for. Blake ended the call and began preparing for what would likely be the most important mission of his life. 17 innocent women were counting on him, whether they knew it or not. And Trinity and Victor were about to learn what happened to people who enslave the innocent. Chapter 6, The Reckoning begins. Blake stood over Trinity and Victor in their separate holding cells, both now restrained with military-grade restraints that left no possibility of escape. The mining facility's isolation was perfect. No one would hear what happened next. Before I rescue the women you've enslaved, Blake said calmly, you're going to experience exactly what you put them through. Trinity looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. Blake, I know you hate me, but please, we could disappear together. Start over. I can change. Blake studied the woman he'd once loved, seeing only a predator desperate to escape consequences. You spent years lying to my face while you tortured innocent people. You married me to provide cover for your crimes. Every kiss, every I love you, every moment of intimacy was just part of your deception. That's not true. I did love you. You loved having cover for your operations, Blake interrupted. A special forces husband provided credibility and protection. That's all I ever was to you. Blake turned to Victor, who was trying to maintain his defiance despite the circumstances. And you took Trinity's weakness and turned it into something monstrous. You convinced her that innocent people were acceptable casualties for your profit. Those women made their own choices, Victor snarled. They wanted easy money. We just showed them the reality of their decisions. Blake pulled out his combat knife, its blade gleaming in the fluorescent light. Let me show you the reality of your decisions. Blake began with Victor's expensive watch, cutting it off his wrist. Then his wallet, his phone, his jewelry, everything that represented his identity and status. Strip, Blake commanded. What? You heard me. Everything off. Now. When Victor hesitated, Blake pressed the knife to his throat. Your victims were forced to strip for your clients. Experience what they experienced. Humiliated and terrified, Victor complied. Blake repeated the process with Trinity, ignoring her pleas and tears. Your victims felt this same humiliation, this same helplessness. The difference is they were innocent. Blake handcuffed both prisoners to chains hanging from the ceiling, the same position their victims have been forced to endure. Then he left them alone in the dark, cold cells. "I'll be back," Blake announced. "Think about what your victims went through while I'm gone rescuing the women you enslaved." Blake drove toward the warehouse on Industrial Boulevard, his vehicle loaded with tactical gear and weapons. Through Iris's intelligence network, he confirmed that 6 armed guards were holding 9 women in the converted warehouse. The building sat in an industrial area surrounded by empty lots and abandoned structures, perfect for Blake's purposes. Using night vision equipment, he conducted a thorough reconnaissance of the facility. 2 guards patrolled the perimeter. 2 more were stationed inside the main warehouse area. Another 2 monitored the office areas where the women were likely being held. Blake began his assault at midnight. The first perimeter guard never saw Blake coming. A sleeper hold rendered him unconscious in seconds. Blake zip-tied him and moved to the second guard, who was eliminated with equal efficiency. Entry into the warehouse required more finesse. Blake used lock-picking skills to access a side door, then moved through the building with the silent precision of a professional operator. The 2 interior guards were positioned near a bank of security monitors. Blake approached from her blind spot and neutralized both simultaneously, one with a chokehold, the other with a pressure point technique that caused instant unconsciousness. Blake found the women in a series of converted office spaces that had been turned into makeshift cells. They were in various states of physical and psychological trauma, some barely conscious from drugs, others huddled in corners terrified to move. "I'm here to rescue you," Blake announced softly. "My name is Blake Morrison. I'm going to get you out of here." The rescue operation took 30 minutes. Blake used his military medical training to assess each woman's condition, providing immediate first aid where needed. He called for ambulances and trauma counselors, ensuring each victim would receive appropriate care. As sirens approached the warehouse, Blake disappeared into the night. He had one more location to hit before dawn. The house in Riverside presented different challenges. It was located in a residential neighborhood where stealth was more critical than firepower. Blake's approach had to be surgical. Using surveillance equipment, he confirmed that 8 women were being held in the basement level of an apparently normal suburban home. Guards provided security, and neighbors were close enough to hear gunfire. Blake's solution was elegant and brutal. He cut the power to the entire block, then used the confusion to enter the house through a second-story window. Moving through the darkened building like a ghost, he systematically eliminated each guard using silent techniques. The women in the basement were in worse condition than those at the warehouse. Several showed signs of severe physical abuse, and all were suffering from malnutrition and psychological trauma. Blake called 911 from the guard's phone, reporting a medical emergency at the address. Then he vanished before emergency responders arrived. By dawn, 17 women had been rescued, and dozens of media outlets were receiving comprehensive intelligence packages from Iris documenting the entire trafficking network. The corruption scandal was about to explode across every news channel in the country. Blake returned to the mining facility as the sun rose over the mountains. Trinity and Victor were still chained in their cells, exhausted and terrified from a night of experiencing what their victims had endured. "How does it feel?" Blake asked them. "Being helpless, not knowing what's going to happen to you? That's what you put those women through, except their ordeal lasted months or years." "Blake," Trinity whispered, "please. I know I can never make up for what I've done, but I can help you ensure this never happens again. I can testify against the corrupt officials." Blake looked at his wife, former wife. He corrected himself with something approaching pity. "You still don't understand. This isn't about justice anymore. This is about consequences." Blake pulled out his phone and showed them news footage from the rescue operations. Emergency responders treating traumatized women, police arresting guards, FBI agents raiding government offices as the corruption scandal exploded. "The women you enslaved are free," Blake announced. "Your network is exposed. Your corrupt protectors are being arrested. Everything you built is destroyed. Then it's over, Victor said desperately. You won. Let us go. Blake smiled, a cold, predatory expression that made both prisoners recoil. Let you go? After what you've done? Blake shook his head. No, we're just getting started. Chapter 7. Justice Delivered. Blake stood in the mining facility's main room, surrounded by the evidence of Trinity and Victor's crimes spread across multiple tables. Financial records, victim photos, client lists, and recorded confessions created a comprehensive picture of their trafficking network's scope and brutality. On his laptop, news coverage played continuously. FBI raids on corrupt officials' homes. Emergency responders treating rescued victims. Politicians and police officers being arrested in handcuffs. The scandal was dominating every news cycle in the country. You see this? Blake called to his prisoners. This is what happens when monsters get exposed to the light. Trinity and Victor, still chained in their cells, looked haggard after their night of experiencing helplessness. But Blake wasn't finished with them yet. I've been thinking about appropriate consequences for your crimes, Blake announced, walking between their cells. The justice system you corrupted can't be trusted to handle this properly. Too many of your collaborators are still in positions of power. Blake pulled out a tablet showing surveillance footage he'd recorded during the rescue operations. 17 women freed from your operation. But according to your confessions, you murdered at least 34 others over the past 2 years. Blake, please, Trinity begged. I can help you find the bodies. Give their families closure. Isn't that worth something? It might be, Blake agreed, if I believed you were capable of genuine remorse. But you're not. You're just trying to manipulate me one more time. Blake activated a wall-mounted television screen. On it, interviews with the rescued women played silently, their faces blurred to protect their identities, but their words devastating in their impact. These women are telling their stories, Blake said, about how you lured them with false job offers, how you drugged them, chained them, forced them to service your clients, how you murdered the ones who tried to escape. Victor tried to maintain his defiance. You can't prove the murders. You have no physical evidence. Blake pulled out a recorder and played Victor's voice from the previous day, the same way we deal with all problems. They went for boat rides and forgot how to swim. Actually, I have very detailed confessions from both of you. Admissions to murder, trafficking, corruption, everything needed to ensure you never hurt anyone again. Blake's phone buzzed with a text from Iris. All evidence packages delivered to media. Story breaking on every major network. Federal task force being assembled to investigate corruption. You did it, Blake. Blake showed the message to his prisoners. My journalist friend has ensured your crimes will be front-page news for months. Every detail of your operation, every victim's story, every corrupt official you bribed, all of it public knowledge. Then why are you keeping us here? Trinity demanded. Turn us over to the FBI. Let the system handle us. Blake laughed bitterly. The system? The same system where Deputy Director Brennan was taking $50,000 a month from your operation? The system where Detective Hutchins fed you information about investigations? The system where ADA Santos made your criminal cases disappear? Blake walked to a wall display showing organizational charts of their network's corruption. Even with the evidence I've provided, how many of these officials will actually face meaningful consequences? How many will make deals, claim ignorance, or simply resign quietly? That's not our fault, Victor protested. It's exactly your fault, Blake replied coldly. You created this network of corruption specifically to protect yourselves from consequences. You made justice impossible through legal channels. Blake pulled out a set of photographs, crime scene images he'd obtained through his intelligence contacts. These are the burial sites where you disposed of your murder victims. Remote locations where you thought they'd never be found. Trinity's face went white. How did you? I have resources you never imagined, Blake said. Military contacts, intelligence operatives, private investigators. People who care about justice more than bureaucratic procedures. Blake activated another screen showing GPS coordinates and satellite imagery. 34 graves scattered across 3 states. The FBI is already conducting recovery operations based on the intelligence I provided. You're going to turn us in then? Victor asked hopefully. Blake studied both prisoners for a long moment. Turn you in to face trial by the same judicial system you corrupted? Watch you hire expensive lawyers and make plea deals with prosecutors you've been bribing for years. Blake pulled out a military field manual and opened it to a chapter on field justice. During the war, when we captured enemy operatives who had committed crimes against civilians, we sometimes couldn't rely on local authorities to handle justice properly. The authorities were either corrupt or compromised. What are you saying? Trinity whispered. I'm saying that sometimes when the system fails, individuals have to ensure justice is served. Blake walked to a storage cabinet and removed several items: rope, concrete blocks, chains, and a waterproof tarp. During your confessions, you describe how you murdered your victims by taking them on boat rides and making them forget how to swim, drowning in deep water where the bodies would never be recovered. Both prisoners began struggling against their restraints and panic. Blake, you can't. Trinity screamed. I'm your wife. You love me. You're not my wife, Blake replied calmly. My wife was a fiction created by a monster to provide cover for trafficking operations. The monster is who you really are. Blake began preparing his equipment with military precision. 34 innocent women died because of your actions. 17 more suffered months or years of torture and sexual slavery. Dozens of families were destroyed. We'll confess everything, Victor shouted. Full cooperation. We'll testify against everyone. Your confessions are already recorded, Blake said. The evidence is already in the hands of investigators. The media has the story. Your testimony isn't needed anymore. Blake attached concrete blocks to chains with practiced efficiency. The beautiful thing about your chosen method of murder is that it leaves no physical evidence. Bodies lost in deep water, never to be recovered. Blake, please. Trinity sobbed. I know I can never make up for what I've done, but please don't do this. Blake looked at his former wife with complete coldness. Did you show mercy to any of your victims when they begged for their lives? The silence was answer enough. Blake loaded his equipment into his vehicle, then returned for his prisoners. Time to go for a boat ride. Chapter 8. The Deep Water. Blake drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward Lake Meridian, a deep mountain lake 40 miles from the mining facility. Trinity and Victor sat in the back of his SUV, still restrained, their faces reflecting the terror their victims had once felt. Blake, Trinity tried one final time. I know you think I never loved you, but that's not true. Yes, I married you initially for cover, but over time... Stop! Blake's voice cut through her words like a blade. Every word you speak is another lie. You're incapable of love. You're a predator who learned to mimic human emotions. The lake came into view as the sun began to rise over the mountains. Blake had chosen this location carefully. Deep water, isolated, no witnesses. The same criteria Trinity and Victor had used when disposing of their murder victims. Blake parked at an abandoned boat ramp and began unloading his equipment. A small motorboat was secured to a hidden dock, acquired through his network of military contacts who didn't ask questions about operational requirements. Please, Victor begged as Blake loaded the concrete blocks into the boat. I'll do anything. Give you money, information, whatever you want. I want the 34 women you murdered to be alive, Blake replied. Can you give me that? Blake forced his prisoners into the boat at gunpoint, securing them to the seats with professional restraints. The boat engine started smoothly, carrying them toward the lake's deepest point. During the war, Blake said conversationally as they moved across the water, I learned that some enemies can't be reformed or rehabilitated. They're too damaged, too committed to evil. The only way to protect innocent people is to eliminate the threat permanently. Trinity was sobbing openly now. Blake, our marriage meant something. I know it did. You can't kill your own wife. You're not my wife, Blake repeated. You're a stranger who wore my wife's face while committing atrocities. The woman I married never existed. Blake stopped the boat over the lake's deepest point, nearly 200 feet of cold, dark water. According to his research, Bodies weighted with concrete blocks would sink to depths where they'd never be recovered. Any last words? Blake asked, preparing the chains and weights. Wait, Victor shouted desperately. There's something else. Something you don't know. Blake paused. What? The operation. It's bigger than just trafficking. We were recruiting the women for something else too. Something that would have made us millions. Elaborate. Victor looked at Trinity, who shook her head frantically. Don't tell him, she whispered. Snuff films, Victor said, his voice breaking. We were making snuff films with some of the women. High-end clients who paid premium prices to watch murders on live video feeds. Blake felt his blood turn to ice. How many? 7 so far. The clients paid $500,000 each to watch. Blake stared at these monsters who had exceeded even his worst estimates of their depravity. You filmed murders for entertainment? Blake, don't listen to him, Trinity pleaded. Victor's lying. He's trying to shock you. She planned it, Victor interrupted. The snuff films were Trinity's idea. She said we could make more money from killing them than keeping them alive. Blake looked at Trinity, seeing the truth in her eyes before she could form another lie. The clients, Blake said quietly. I want names. Blake, please. Names. Blake roared, his composure finally cracking. Terrified by his fury, Trinity provided a list that included politicians, celebrities, business leaders, people who paid enormous sums to watch innocent women being murdered for their entertainment. Blake recorded everything, then transmitted the information to Iris with a simple message: additional evidence. Ensure this reaches the task force immediately. Now you know everything, Victor said desperately. That's worth something, right? Information like this. Blake attached the first set of chains and concrete blocks to Victor's restraints. Information like this proves you're even more depraved than I thought. Blake, wait. Trinity screamed. I can help you catch the snuff film clients. I know where the videos are stored, how to access the payment systems. I already have that information from your confessions and computer files, Blake replied. The FBI will find everything they need. Blake lifted Victor to the edge of the boat. The former military police officer tried to struggle, but the restraints and weights made movement impossible. Any of your murder victims who begged for mercy? Blake asked. Victor's face twisted with rage and fear. You're a killer just like us now, Morrison. What does that make you? The difference, Blake said calmly, is that I kill monsters to protect innocent people. You killed innocent people to become monsters. Blake pushed Victor over the side. The weighted chains pulled him under immediately, his final scream cut short by the dark water. Blake turned to Trinity, who was hyperventilating with terror. Blake, please, she whispered. I know I can never earn your forgiveness, but please don't do this. Find some other way. Blake studied the woman who had shared his bed while planning murders for profit. What other way? Life in prison where you'll manipulate guards and other inmates? Escape attempts funded by your hidden assets? Plea bargains that reduce your sentence. Blake attached the chains to Trinity's restraints. You corrupted the justice system specifically to avoid consequences. There is no other way. Blake, I love you, Trinity said desperately. Whatever else I've done, that part was real. Please don't let your last memory of me be like this. Blake looked into Trinity's eyes and spoke with quiet finality. My last memory of you is finding Iris Novak handcuffed to a bed in your operation. Everything before that was a lie. Blake lifted Trinity to the edge of the boat. She wasn't struggling anymore, just staring at him with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. Our wedding vows, she whispered. Till death do us part. You promised. Death has already parted us, Blake replied. You died the moment you chose to become a monster. Blake pushed his former wife into the dark water and watched her disappear beneath the surface. The lake returned to stillness, its depths now holding the final remains of a trafficking network that had destroyed dozens of lives. Blake sat in the boat for several minutes, feeling something settle inside him. Not satisfaction, but a sense of completion. Justice had been served. The innocent were protected. The monsters were gone. Blake started the boat engine and headed back to shore. He had cleanup work to finish and a new life to begin. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 3 months later, Blake Morrison sat in a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon, reading news coverage of the federal task force's final report on the trafficking network. The investigation had uncovered evidence of corruption that reached the highest levels of government, resulting in dozens of arrests and resignations. Deputy Director Charles Brennan faced life in prison for racketeering and conspiracy. Detective Ray Hutchins had been found dead in his jail cell, an apparent suicide. ADA Maria Santos had fled the country and was wanted on international warrants. The snuff film network had been completely exposed, with clients facing charges ranging from conspiracy to commit murder to financing criminal enterprises. Several high-profile politicians and business leaders had been arrested in coordinated raids. Blake's phone buzzed with a text from Iris Novak, meeting with documentary producers today. They want to tell the complete story of how the network was exposed and the victims were rescued. You sure you don't want to participate? Blake typed back, the victims' stories are what matter. Keep me anonymous. Blake had disappeared from his old life completely. Officially, Blake Morrison had died in a boating accident on Lake Meridian, the same accident that killed Trinity Morrison and Victor Reyes when their boat was found capsized with no survivors. In reality, Blake had used skills learned during his Special Forces years to create a new identity. Thomas Blake was a security consultant based in Portland, with impeccable references and a background that would withstand careful scrutiny. The insurance money from Trinity's death had been donated anonymously to organizations that helped trafficking victims. Blake had no interest in profiting from her crimes. Blake's new apartment was spartanly furnished but comfortable. He'd returned to the simple life he'd known before marriage, finding peace in routine and solitude. The nightmares had stopped after the first month. His phone rang. A potential client needing security consultation for her small business. Blake Security Solutions, this is Tom. Mr. Blake? My name is Sarah Chun. I run a women's shelter downtown, and we've been having some security issues. Break-ins, threatening phone calls. Could you help us? Blake smiled. I'd be happy to help. Where would you like to meet? Blake spent the afternoon at the shelter, assessing security needs and meeting with staff. The women staying there reminded him of the trafficking victims he'd rescued, survivors working to rebuild their lives after experiencing unspeakable trauma. We don't have much budget for security upgrades, Sarah explained apologetically. Don't worry about the cost, Blake replied. Consider this pro bono work. Blake installed a comprehensive security system over the following week, including cameras, alarms, and panic buttons. He also trained the staff in basic security protocols and provided his personal contact information for emergencies. Why are you doing this? Sarah asked as Blake completed the installation. You could make more money working for corporations. Blake looked at the women in the shelter's common area. Mothers with children, young women trying to start over, elderly women who had nowhere else to go. Sometimes protecting innocent people is more important than making money, he said simply. Blake's new life settled into a satisfying routine. Security consultations during the day, volunteer work at the shelter in the evenings, martial arts training to stay sharp. No romantic relationships. He wasn't ready to trust anyone with that level of intimacy again. On the anniversary of Trinity and Victor's deaths, Blake drove to a mountain overlook near Lake Meridian, not to mourn them, but to reflect on the path that had led him here. His phone buzzed with a news alert. The last of the trafficking network's major clients had been sentenced. A former senator who received 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder in the snuff film operations. Blake deleted the alert without reading the details. That chapter of his life was closed. As the sun set over the mountains, Blake received a call from Sarah at the shelter. Tom, we have a situation. A woman just arrived with her 2 children. She's been trafficked for 3 years and finally escaped. She's terrified her captors will find her. Blake was already walking toward his vehicle. I'll be right there. Blake Morrison was dead, killed by the betrayal that had destroyed his marriage and his faith in the justice system. Thomas Blake was someone different, a protector who used his skills to help innocent people rebuild their lives. He'd found his purpose again, not as a husband living a suburban fantasy, but as a guardian standing between predators and their prey. Blake drove toward the shelter as night fell over the city. There were people who needed protection, and he would provide it. Some threats required legal solutions. Others required permanent ones. Blake was prepared for both. In his rearview mirror, the lake disappeared into darkness, holding its secrets beneath the deep water. The monsters were gone, the innocent were protected, and justice had been served. Blake Morrison was finally at peace. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Barrett Olson had always been the calm one. While his younger brother Lewis joined the Marines at 18, driven by some restless need to prove himself, Barrett stayed behind in their hometown of Ashland, Oregon. He'd taken over their late father's woodworking business, turning it into something more, custom furniture that wealthy clients from Portland and San Francisco commissioned months in advance. At 34, he lived alone in the house they'd grown up in, methodical and self-sufficient, his days measured in sawdust and precision cuts. Lewis had been deployed to Okinawa 3 months ago. Before leaving, he'd asked Barrett to check on his wife, Catalina Marshall, and their 2-year-old son, Milan. Barrett had agreed, though he'd sensed something off in the request. Lewis's voice carried a weight beyond normal deployment anxiety. They'd been brothers long enough for Barrett to read between the words. Catalina had moved to Ashland 4 years ago, arriving with the kind of manufactured charm that made Barrett instinctively cautious. She'd worked as a pharmaceutical sales rep, traveling constantly, her smile bright and rehearsed. She'd pursued Lewis with focused intensity, pregnant within 6 months of their first date. The wedding happened quickly, too quickly, Barrett had thought, but never said. Lewis was 26, eager, and Catalina knew exactly how to make herself essential. Barrett had watched her carefully over the years. She collected admirers the way some people collected art. Casually, almost absently, always maintaining plausible deniability. At family gatherings, she'd touch arms a beat too long, leaning closer than necessary, her laugh pitched for maximum effect. Lewis seemed oblivious, or perhaps willfully blind. Barrett had kept his observations to himself. Some truths only mattered when they were ready to surface. The first check-in had been unremarkable. Barrett had stopped by on a Tuesday afternoon, finding Catalina and Milan in the backyard. She'd been pleasant, distant, clearly tolerating rather than appreciating his presence. Milan had toddled over, grabbing Barrett's hand with sticky fingers, babbling in that private language toddlers speak. The boy had Lewis's eyes, dark, trusting, open. The second visit, 2 weeks later, she hadn't been home. Barrett had let himself in with the spare key Lewis had given him, calling out as he entered. The house had that peculiar silence of recent abandonment. Lights on, television playing to an empty room, a bowl of cereal abandoned on the coffee table, milk forming a skin on its surface. He'd found Milan in his crib, diapers sagging, face red from crying. The boy had been alone for at least 2 hours, maybe more. Barrett had changed him, fed him applesauce from the pantry, and waited. Catalina had returned near sunset, her hair slightly disheveled, makeup refreshed but imperfect. She'd offered no explanation beyond errands, her eyes daring him to challenge her. Barrett had said nothing, but he'd started dropping by unannounced. Now, 3 weeks into March, Barrett pulled into the driveway at 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday. The house looked normal from the outside, a modest ranch-style home in a neighborhood of identical structures, each with their carefully maintained lawns and 2 car garages. Lewis's truck sat in the driveway, though Lewis was 7,000 miles away. Catalina drove a white Lexus SUV that was nowhere in sight. Barrett used his key, the familiar click of the deadlock echoing in the entryway. Catalina. He stepped inside, instincts already firing. The television was off. The house held a different quality of silence than before. Not recent absence, but active concealment. He moved through the living room, noting the wine glass on the side table, lipstick print on the rim. 2 glasses, actually. One with lipstick, one without. He climbed the stairs, calling Catalina's name again, though he already knew she wouldn't answer. Milan's crying reached him before he opened the nursery door. The sound had that exhausted quality of a child who'd been at it for a while, voice hoarse and desperate. Barrett pushed open the door and found Milan standing in his crib, face blotchy and wet, reaching out with both arms. The window stood open, curtains shifting in the late afternoon breeze. Barrett crossed to the crib, lifting Milan out. The boy clung to him, hiccuping sobs against his shoulder. Barrett moved to the window, looking down into the backyard. The scene assembled itself in fragments, his brain refusing the totality for several seconds. Catalina lay on the patio stones, her body at an angle that spoke of impact and gravity. She wore a black slip dress, one shoe off, her hair fanned around her head. But she wasn't alone. A man knelt beside her, his back to the house. He wore expensive-looking gray slacks and a white dress shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. As Barrett watched, the man stood, running both hands through his hair in a gesture of pure panic. He turned slightly, and Barrett recognized him. Jamal Fisher, a real estate developer who'd made a fortune flipping properties in the Rogue Valley. Barrett had done custom work for him 2 years ago, built-in shelving for his home office. Jamal was 43, married, with 3 teenage daughters. Barrett pulled out his phone and dialed 911, keeping his voice steady as he gave the address and a brief description of what he was seeing. Milan had quieted against his shoulder, thumb in his mouth, sensing the shift in the adult world around him. "There's been an accident," Barrett told the dispatcher. "A woman has fallen from a second-story window. She's not moving. There's a man with her in the backyard." He stayed on the line as instructed, watching through the window as Jamal paced the patio, pulling out his own phone, putting it away, pulling it out again. The man's indecision was visible even from this distance, panic and calculation warring in every movement. Then Jamal did something Barrett hadn't expected. He walked to the back fence, looking around the yard with clear purpose. He picked up a decorative garden stone from the flower bed, examined it, and placed it near Catalina's head. He was staging the scene. Barrett's mind worked quickly, cataloging details. The open window, Catalina's state of dress, or undress, the wine glasses downstairs. The way Jamal was positioning the stone, creating a narrative of a woman who'd had too much to drink, leaned out too far, struck her head on the patio stones. But Barrett had seen the curtains shift, had noted the window screen lying on the ground 10 feet from Catalina's body. You don't lean out a window and take the screen with you. You push through it, or someone pushes you through it. Sirens approached, growing louder. Jamal heard them too, his head snapping up. He made a decision, moving away from Catalina toward the back gate. He was going to run. Barrett moved quickly. Still holding Milan, he descended the stairs and went through the kitchen to the back door. He stepped onto the patio just as Jamal reached the gate. Going somewhere, Barrett's voice cut across the yard. Jamal froze, turning. His face went through several calculations in rapid succession. Fight, flight, denial, excuse. He settled on authority. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm the brother of the woman's husband," Barrett said calmly. "The one deployed overseas. You might remember me. I built those shelves in your office." "Jamal Fisher, right? Real estate developer. Married to Dolores, father of 3 girls." Jamal's face went pale. The sirens were close now, maybe 2 blocks away. "This was an accident," Jamal said quickly. "She was drunk." She leaned out the window, with the screen still in place. Barrett gestured to the screen on the ground. "That's interesting physics. You don't understand." "I understand plenty." Barrett shifted Milan to his other hip, the boy's weight grounding him. "I understand you were in this house with my brother's wife, while their child cried alone upstairs. I understand she's lying dead on this patio, and you were about 2 seconds from running before I came out here." Jamal's jaw worked. "It was an accident," he repeated, but the conviction had leaked from his voice. The sirens reached a crescendo, then cut off. Barrett heard car doors slamming in front of the house, voices calling out. He kept his eyes on Jamal, memorizing every detail of the man's face, The fear, the calculation, the self-preservation instinct that would kick in the moment the police came through that back gate. "We'll let them sort it out," Barrett said evenly. The first officer came through the side gate, weapon drawn until he assessed the scene. Then came the paramedics, though it was clear from Catalina's position that there would be nothing to do beyond documenting and removing. More officers arrived, securing the scene, separating Barrett and Jamal, taking initial statements. Barrett stood in the kitchen with Milan, answering questions while a female officer, Sergeant Deanna Riggs, according to her nameplate, wrote everything down. He told her about Lewis's deployment, about being asked to check on Catalina, about finding Milan alone and Catalina in the yard. He told her about the wine glasses, the open window, the display screen. "And man in the yard?" Sergeant Riggs asked. "Jamal Fisher, local real estate developer. When I looked out the window, he was kneeling beside her. Then he stood up, looked around, and placed a garden stone near her head. It looked like he was staging something. Then he tried to leave through the back gate." Sergeant Riggs's pen paused. "Staging the scene? That's what it looked like to me." She made several notes, then excused herself. Barrett watched through the window as she conferred with other officers. They were looking at the garden stone, at the screen, at the window above. Jamal stood by the back fence, talking rapidly to a detective, his hands moving in emphatic gestures. The next 10 minutes unfolded in a way Barrett would replay countless times afterward. The lead detective, a man in his 50s with iron gray hair and tired eyes, examined the window, the patio, and Catalina's body with methodical care. He spoke with Jamal at length, then with Barrett again, asking detailed questions about timelines and observations. Then Jamal made his first mistake. When asked about his relationship with Catalina, he denied knowing her beyond a casual acquaintance. Said he'd been driving by, saw someone fall, and stopped to help. Barrett listened to this from the kitchen, where he was giving Milan a cup of water. He said nothing, waiting. The detective made a phone call. 10 minutes later, a tech arrived and started processing the scene more thoroughly. They found Jamal's fingerprints on the wine glass without lipstick. They found his phone in the upstairs bedroom, dropped between the nightstand and the wall, a detail he'd missed in his panic. Jamal changed his story then. They'd been having an affair. Today had been a mistake, a moment of weakness. They'd been drinking wine, gone upstairs, argued about the situation. She'd been emotional, unstable. She'd gone to the nursery window, opened it for air. She'd been drunk, leaned too far. He'd panicked after she fell, knew how it would look. Barrett watched the detective's face remain neutral, professional. But he saw the calculation there, the same one working through his own mind. The screen, the trajectory, the force it would take. The detective had Jamal taken to the station for formal questioning. They processed the scene for hours, photographing everything, measuring angles, collecting evidence. A social worker arrived from Milan. Barrett argued to keep him, but protocol won. The boy went with the social worker, clinging to a stuffed elephant, his world fragmenting in ways he was too young to understand. Barrett was allowed to leave near midnight. He drove home through empty streets, his mind cataloging everything he'd seen and heard. Catalina was dead. Jamal Fisher had been there. The scene told a story, but Barrett wasn't sure yet which story was true: accident, negligence, or something darker. He thought about Lewis, 7,000 miles away, unreachable until tomorrow when the official notifications went through the proper military channels. His brother would come home to a dead wife, a traumatized son, and a mess that would take months or years to untangle. Barrett parked in his driveway and sat in the darkness, hands on the steering wheel. He'd been the calm one, the steady one, the brother who stayed behind and built beautiful things from raw wood. But calm was a choice, and steadiness could be redirected. He went inside and made coffee he wouldn't drink, then opened his laptop. He started with public records, property transactions, business filings, anything connected to Jamal Fisher. Then he moved to social media, carefully screenshotted posts and photos, documenting everything before it could disappear. Because Barrett understood something the detective might not yet see. Whether Catalina's death was accident or intention, Jamal Fisher would lawyer up, shape the narrative, protect his reputation and his assets. Men like him always did. They built empires from other people's desperation and insulated themselves with money and connections. But Barrett had spent his adult life working with his hands, understanding that the right pressure in the right place could transform solid wood into something new. People weren't so different. Everyone had a grain, a point of weakness where the right force would split them clean through. He worked through the night, building a different kind of structure, one made of information and pattern recognition. By dawn, he had the skeleton of something useful. Now, he just needed to understand exactly what had happened in that upstairs bedroom before Catalina went through the window. And he needed to do it before Jamal Fisher's lawyers buried the truth under paperwork and reasonable doubt. The funeral happened 11 days later. Lewis had been flown home on emergency leave, landing at Portland International at 0600 on a Tuesday morning. Barrett picked him up, and they'd driven the 4 hours to Ashland in near silence. Lewis looked hollowed out, his face carrying that particular emptiness of someone whose world had been restructured in their absence. "Tell me again," Lewis had said somewhere south of Salem. "Everything you saw." Barrett had gone through it, the third or fourth recitation, each one precisely the same. He'd learned early that consistency mattered, that the truth needed to be bulletproof. He described finding Milan, the open window, Catalina's body, Jamal's panic and attempted staging. "They're calling it an accident," Lewis said. His voice carried no inflection. "The preliminary report says she was intoxicated, leaned out too far while emotional. That's what they're calling it right now. But you don't think it was." Barrett drove another mile before answering. "I think she was having an affair with Jamal Fisher. I think they were together that afternoon. I think something happened in that bedroom that ended with her going through a window. Whether it was an accident, negligence, or intentional, I don't know yet." "Yet," Lewis repeated, "the investigation is ongoing." Jamal Fisher. Lewis turned the name over. "The developer. You did work for him 2 years ago. Built-ins for his home office. He tried to negotiate my price down by 40%, acted like he was doing me a favor by hiring me at all. What do you know about him? Married 22 years. 3 daughters, ages 15, 17, and 19. Wife Dolores comes from old timber money. Her grandfather owned half the forest between here and Klamath Falls. Jamal came from nothing, worked construction until he married into access and capital. Built his business on flipping distressed properties, usually buying them from people who didn't understand their value. He's worth somewhere around $8 million now." Lewis absorbed this. And Catalina was good at finding men with something to offer. Barrett said it gently, but the truth didn't soften. "I'm sorry. I knew," Lewis said quietly. "Not about Jamal specifically, but I knew she was. I deployed anyway. Thought maybe distance would clarify things, force her choose. Guess it did." They arrived in Ashland to find Catalina's sister, LaToya Frost, already managing the funeral arrangements. LaToya was 38, a medical billing specialist from Sacramento who'd driven up the day after the death. She shared Catalina's features, but none of her calculated charm. LaToya was blunt, efficient, and clearly exhausted by her younger sister's life choices. "She was always like this," LaToya had told Barrett over coffee at a diner near the funeral home. Lewis was meeting with the director, selecting a casket he couldn't afford and didn't care about. Always found the most complicated way to live. Drama was oxygen to her. How long had the affair been going on? With the real estate guy? 6 months, maybe more. She called me about it twice. First time bragging, second time panicking. Said he'd promised to leave his wife, set her up with her own place. Then he backed out. She threatened to tell his wife everything. Barrett's coffee cup paused halfway to his mouth. "When was the second call?" 3 weeks ago. She was furious. Said she had leverage, proof of everything, and she'd burn his whole life down if he didn't follow through. What kind of proof? Knowing Catalina? Photos, videos, text messages. She documented everything. Kept it like insurance. Where? LaToya shrugged. Her phone, probably. Or backed up somewhere. She wasn't stupid, just destructive. Barrett thought about Catalina's phone. The police had it, but they were treating this as an accident investigation, not a homicide. They'd look at recent calls and texts, But deep forensic analysis? That required probable cause they might not pursue. The police need to know about this, he said. I told them. They took notes, said they'd follow up. That detective, Hosea Riddle, seemed interested but non-committal. Barrett knew Detective Riddle slightly. He'd investigated a break-in at Barrett's workshop 2 years ago, recovered some stolen tools. Riddle was thorough, but operated within strict procedural bounds. He wouldn't push for a murder investigation without solid evidence, and Jamal's lawyers were already constructing the accident narrative. The funeral drew a modest crowd, some of Catalina's pharmaceutical industry colleagues, neighbors, a few of Lewis's Marine buddies on leave. Jamal Fisher didn't attend, which was expected. His wife Dolores did, which wasn't. Dolores Fisher sat in the back row, wearing a black dress and oversized sunglasses despite the overcast day. She was 51, elegant in that careful way of women who'd learned to maintain appearances regardless of underlying rot. Barrett watched her throughout the service, noting how she never cried, never dabbed at her eyes, just sat with perfect posture and focused attention. After the burial, as people dispersed to their cars, Dolores approached Barrett. "You're the brother who found her," she said. "Not a question. I am. I wanted to thank you for calling the police so quickly. It must have been traumatic." Her tone was perfectly calibrated, sympathetic but distant, acknowledging without engaging. Barrett studied her face, looking for tells. "Your husband was there when I arrived," he said evenly. "Yes, he told me. Terrible coincidence, driving by at that exact moment." "Is that what he told you?" Her lips compressed slightly. "I'm not here to discuss my marriage with a stranger, Mr. Olson. I came to pay respects to the deceased. She was having an affair with Jamal. They've been involved for months." Dolores removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were the color of winter sky, pale and sharp. "I'm aware." Barrett had expected denial, anger, defensiveness. Not this cold acknowledgement. "You knew. I've been married 22 years, Mr. Olson. You learned to recognize the signs. This wasn't his first indiscretion. But you stayed. I stayed because I have 3 daughters to protect and a lifestyle I'm not willing to sacrifice. Jamal is useful in certain ways. His fidelity isn't among them. He might have killed her. I doubt that." Dolores replaced her sunglasses. "Jamal is many things, selfish, vain, morally flexible, but he's not violent. He's a coward. If she went through that window, it was because she jumped or fell. Jamal would have run, not pushed. He tried to stage the scene. Self-preservation isn't the same as murder. He panicked because he's weak, not because he's guilty." She adjusted her purse. "But I can see you don't believe that. I believe evidence." "Then gather some." The police seemed satisfied with their accident conclusion. "Perhaps you'll find something they missed." She turned to leave, then paused. "Though I wonder what you're hoping to accomplish. Your brother's wife is dead. Proving Jamal's culpability won't bring her back. It might give my nephew answers when he's old enough to ask questions. Or might give you purpose." Dolores studied him with clinical interest. "You strike me as someone who needs projects, Mr. Olson. Something to build toward. Just be careful you don't construct something that collapses on you." She walked away, leaving Barrett standing beside his truck. Lewis approached, carrying Milan. The boy had fallen asleep against his father's shoulder, exhausted by grief he couldn't name. "Who was that?" Lewis asked. "Dolores Fisher, Jamal's wife." Lewis's expression darkened. "What did she want?" "To see if I'd cause her problems." Barrett opened the truck door. "She knows about the affair. Has known. Doesn't care as long as her life stays intact." "Jesus." Lewis buckled Milan into the car seat Barrett had installed. "What kind of people are we dealing with?" "The kind who make cost-benefit analyses instead of moral judgments." Barrett started the engine. "She warned me off investigating further." "Which means there's something to investigate." They drove to Barrett's house, where Milan would stay while Lewis processed paperwork and benefits and the 1,000 administrative tasks death created. Barrett had converted the spare bedroom into a temporary nursery, buying a crib and supplies with efficiency that surprised him. He never wanted children of his own, but Milan's presence felt like responsibility rather than burden. That evening, after Lewis left for the base to handle administrative requirements, Barrett sat at his dining table with his laptop and the notes he'd been compiling. He'd been careful, methodical, treating this like any complex build. Understand the materials, plan the structure, execute with precision. Jamal Fisher's financial records were partially accessible through public sources. The man leveraged debt aggressively, always operating on the edge of overextension. His properties carried heavy mortgages, refinanced repeatedly to fund new acquisitions. He had 3 LLCs, each holding different assets, structured to isolate liability. Barrett cross-referenced property records with Catalina's known schedule. They'd been meeting at a rental property Jamal owned on the east side of town, a furnished condo in a complex popular with short-term corporate rentals. The unit was listed as vacant, but showed utility usage indicating regular occupancy. More interesting, the property was titled under an LLC that listed Jamal and a silent partner. Enoch Peters, a Portland-based attorney who specialized in asset protection and estate planning. Enoch's firm had been retained by Jamal for business consultation starting 7 months ago, right around when the affair with Catalina began. Barrett pulled Enoch's background. Yale Law School, partner at a prestigious firm, client list including several individuals who'd successfully shielded assets during divorce proceedings. This wasn't Jamal's first time planning for potential marital consequences. Barrett was building a pattern, seeing shapes emerge from data. Jamal had structured his business to protect assets from liability. He'd retained sophisticated legal counsel around the same time he started the affair. He'd created a private space for the relationship, separate from traceable hotels or public venues. These weren't the actions of a reckless affair. This was someone planning for contingencies, protecting downside risk. Barrett thought about LaToya's words. Catalina had threatened to expose everything when Jamal backed out. She'd had proof, leverage. Where was it now? Her phone was with the police. Her laptop had been removed from the house during scene processing. But Catalina had been a pharmaceutical sales rep. She'd lived on technology, backed everything to the cloud. Barrett made a decision. He called LaToya. Did Catalina use cloud storage? He asked. Of course. She had everything synced. Photos, documents, emails. She was paranoid about losing data after her last phone died, and she lost a bunch of client files. What service? Google. What? Do you know her password? Silence. Then I might. I need to see what she backed up. The police might not look without specific cause. That could be illegal. LaToya, your sister threatened to expose Jamal Fisher 3 weeks before she died. Then she went through a window while he was in the room. The police are calling it an accident. Don't you want to know what actually happened? Another pause. Her password was Milan's birthday plus exclamation point. Capital M. Barrett wrote it down. Thank you. If anyone asks, I didn't tell you that. Understood. He hung up and stared at the information. This was a line. Crossing it meant potential legal consequences, evidence contamination, ethical compromise. But it also meant truth, or at least proximity to truth. He thought about Milan asleep upstairs, about Lewis trying to process a sudden widowhood, about Catalina lying dead because of an accident that felt increasingly deliberate. Barrett opened an incognito browser window and navigated to Google Drive. He entered Catalina's email address and the password LaToya had provided. It worked. The drive was organized chaos, folders labeled by client names, pharmaceutical companies, personal files. Barrett started with photos, finding thousands of images. Most were mundane. Milan at various ages, selfies, food, vacation snapshots. Then he found a folder titled Insurance, created 6 months ago, last modified 3 weeks before her death. Inside were videos, dozens of them. Barrett opened the first one. It showed Catalina and Jamal in bed, the setting clearly the rental condo. The video was explicit. More importantly, it was dated and time-stamped, showing the metadata embedded in the file. There were texts too, screenshots of conversations where Jamal made promises about leaving Dolores, setting Catalina up independently, providing financial support. He made specific commitments, dollar amounts, timelines. And there were documents, photos of legal papers Catalina had somehow obtained or been shown. A proposed post-nuptial agreement between Jamal and Dolores that would have protected most of his assets in case of divorce. It was dated 2 months after the affair began. Barrett leaned back, processing. Catalina had been thorough, documenting everything with clear intent. This wasn't just insurance. It was ammunition. If Jamal tried to end things, she could destroy his marriage, damage his business reputation, potentially create legal liability. The last file in the folder was a voice memo, recorded 2 days before her death. Barrett clicked play. Catalina's voice, tense and angry. "This is for my sister Latoya, in case something happens. Jamal is threatening me. He says if I release any of the material I've collected, he'll make me regret it. He's connected to people." That's what he said. Connected to people who handle problems. I don't know if he's serious or trying to scare me, but I'm scared. If you're hearing this, it means something went wrong. Jamal Fisher knows things about me too, about Milan's father, about money I borrowed from pharmaceutical company accounts and replaced. He says he'll go to the police with evidence against me if I don't delete everything and disappear. I don't know what to do. The recording ended. Barrett sat in silence, the pieces rearranging. This wasn't a simple affair gone wrong. This was mutual blackmail, escalating threats, 2 people locked in destructive leverage against each other. And Catalina had ended up dead. He downloaded everything to an encrypted drive, then deleted his browser history and closed the laptop. He needed to think about his next move carefully. This information was explosive, but it was also illegally obtained. Handing it to police might get it excluded from evidence. Using it himself meant becoming something other than a witness. His phone rang. Detective Riddle. "Mr. Olson, sorry to call so late. I have some updates on the investigation I wanted to share with you directly." Barrett's pulse quickened. "I appreciate that. The medical examiner has completed the autopsy. Blood alcohol level was 0.14, legally intoxicated but not incapacitated. Cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with striking concrete from second-story fall. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of struggle. What about the window screen? Forensics says it could have been pushed out as she fell or removed earlier. The force required wouldn't be significant." And Jamal Fisher, his statement has been consistent. He admits to the affair, admits to being present, maintains that Mrs. Olson was emotional and intoxicated, that she went to the window for air and fell. His phone records support his timeline. "We found no evidence of physical altercation. So you're closing it as accidental death. Unless new evidence emerges, yes. I know that's not what you wanted to hear, Mr. Olson. But sometimes the simple answer is the true one." Barrett thanked him and ended the call. He sat in the dark living room, thinking about the voice memo, about Catalina's fear, about Jamal's threats. Then he thought about something Dolores had said. Jamal is useful in certain ways. If Jamal had connections who handle problems, where did those connections come from? A man who'd worked construction before marrying money didn't develop those resources overnight. Barrett returned his laptop and started a new search, this time focused on Jamal's early years. He found old business partnerships, dissolved LLCs, a pattern of association with individuals who'd been investigated, though rarely prosecuted, for various financial crimes. Tax evasion, wire fraud, insurance fraud. One name appeared repeatedly: Horacio Haney, a general contractor who'd done large-scale commercial work throughout Southern Oregon. Horacio had employed Jamal in the mid-90s, then partnered with him on several early property flips. The partnership had ended badly, with lawsuits and countersuits, eventually settled out of court. Horacio was 63 now, semi-retired, living in Medford. He'd been investigated twice for connections to organized labor corruption, but never charged. His son, Christopher Foley, different last name, Horacio's wife's surname, worked as a business consultant, which Barrett's research suggested was code for various forms of problem-solving that existed in legal gray areas. This was the connection. Jamal knew people through Horacio, people who could apply pressure, create fear, potentially arrange accidents. Barrett's phone buzzed with a text from Lewis, administrative nightmare. "Will be another few days before I can return. How's Milan?" "Good," Barrett replied. "Sleeping now. Take your time." He looked at the encrypted drive containing Catalina's files. He thought about the voice memo, her fear, her documented threats against Jamal matched by his threats against her. The police were satisfied with their accident conclusion. Jamal would return to his life, perhaps more careful next time, but fundamentally unchanged. Dolores would maintain her comfortable ignorance. Milan would grow up with questions that went unanswered, unless Barrett did something. He thought about the woodworking shop, about the way precision and patience could transform raw materials into something refined and permanent, about how the right pressure, applied correctly, could achieve results that brute force never could. Barrett made his decision. He wasn't going to give the evidence to the police. He was going to use it for something else. 3 months passed. Summer arrived in the Rogue Valley with its familiar pattern of hot days and cool evenings, tourists crowding Ashland's Shakespeare Festival, life proceeding as though Catalina Marshall had never existed. Lewis had returned to Okinawa to complete his deployment. Milan stayed with Barrett, the arrangement formalized through family court. Barrett had converted the temporary nursery into something permanent, adjusted his work schedule around daycare and toddler routines, and discovered a capacity for patience he hadn't known he possessed. To outside observers, Barrett Olson had moved on. He ran his woodworking business, cared for his nephew, attended a grief support group that met Tuesday evenings at a Methodist church. He was calm, steady, processing trauma through productive routine. But in the hours after Milan went to sleep, Barrett was building something else. He'd spent the first month just watching Jamal Fisher's patterns, routines, vulnerabilities. Jamal had indeed returned to his regular life. The affair with Catalina had apparently taught him nothing about discretion. By mid-May, he was involved with someone new. Randy Huber, a 29-year-old architect who'd recently moved to Ashland to work on a commercial development project Jamal was financing. Barrett cataloged this too. Photographs of them at restaurants in Grants Pass and Medford, never anywhere local. Credit card records showing hotel stays, obtained through a private investigator Barrett had hired. A former detective named Benny Kidd who operated out of Portland and asked no questions beyond what the job required. Benny had also confirmed Jamal's connection to Horacio Haney and Christopher Foley. Christopher does enforcement work for various business interests, Benny had explained during a meeting at a coffee shop in Eugene. Debt collection, intimidation, occasionally making problems disappear. He's been investigated but never prosecuted, smart enough to stay insulated. Would he kill someone? Benny had considered this. Directly? Probably not. Arranged circumstances where someone might get hurt? Different question. Barrett had thanked him and paid in cash. The second month, Barrett focused on Dolores Fisher. She was the key, the fulcrum on which everything would turn. He'd researched her exhaustively, understanding that she was far more than the elegant, complicit wife she appeared. Dolores had inherited her family's timber fortune at 23 after her father died in a logging accident. She'd grown the portfolio aggressively, investing in real estate and tech startups, turning $8 million into $30 million over 3 decades. Jamal had access to some of that wealth through their marriage, but Dolores had protected most of it through careful legal structures. The post-nuptial agreement Catalina had photographed was real, and it was ironclad. If Jamal initiated divorce, he'd leave with almost nothing. If Dolores initiated it, same result. But there were provisions for fault, adultery specifically. If Dolores could prove Jamal's serial infidelity, she could void the agreement and pursue a more equitable division. She'd chosen not to, year after year, affair after affair. Barrett needed to understand why. He found the answer in her daughters. The oldest, Georgina Schneider, was 19 and studying at Berkeley. The middle one, 17-year-old Sherry Gill, was a competitive equestrian training for Olympic trials. The youngest, 15-year-old Louise Graves, was a classical pianist performing at national competitions. All 3 girls adored their father. Jamal, for all his flaws as a husband, was apparently an attentive and loving parent. He attended Sherry's competitions, flew to Berkeley for Georgina's important events, sat through Louise's piano recitals with genuine pride. Dolores had stayed to preserve her daughter's relationship with her father, not out of love or fear, but calculated protection of what mattered to her most. This was useful information. In the third month, Barrett implemented his plan. It began with an anonymous package delivered to Dolores Fisher's personal attorney, not Jamal's lawyer, but her own independent counsel, a woman named Tammy Mooney who specialized in high-net-worth divorce cases. The package contained a flash drive with selected contents from Catalina's insurance folder, videos of Jamal with Catalina, text messages making specific promises, and documentation of the affair timeline. Notably absent was the voice memo or anything suggesting Jamal's threats or Catalina's fear. Barrett included a typed note. Mrs. Fisher deserves to know the extent of her husband's recent activities. The deceased documented everything thoroughly. There are copies. Tammy Mooney would be ethically obligated to inform Dolores. What Dolores chose to do with the information was her decision. Barrett waited. For days later, his phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Olson, this is Dolores Fisher. I believe we need to talk. They met at a state park outside Medford, neutral territory, where they were unlikely to be seen by anyone who knew either of them. Dolores arrived in a Mercedes SUV, wearing casual clothes that probably cost more than Barrett's monthly income. She carried the kind of understated confidence that came from never having to prove anything. You sent the package to my attorney, she said without preamble. I thought you deserved to know. I already knew about the affair with Catalina. I told you that, but you didn't know she documented it so thoroughly. And you didn't know he was already involved with someone new. Dolores's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Randy Huber, you've noticed. I notice everything, Mr. Olson. I simply choose my battles. She crossed her arms. What do you want? I want to know what happened to Catalina. The police concluded it was an accident. The police concluded what the evidence allowed them to conclude. But you and I both know your husband is capable of making problems disappear. You think Jamal killed her. I think he threatened her, and she ended up dead. Whether he pushed her or created circumstances where she fell, does the distinction matter? Dolores was silent for a long moment, studying the lake stretching out before them. My daughters love their father. I know, if I divorce him, particularly if I do so publicly and acrimoniously, it will damage their relationship with him. Georgina is old enough to understand, but Louise and Sherry would struggle. They'd choose sides, and whichever side they chose would create wounds. So you're going to do nothing. I didn't say that. Dolores turned to face him. I said I choose my battles. Jamal is useful. He's good with the girls. He handles certain business matters competently, and he stays out of my primary interests. But he's also a liability. His judgment is poor. His affairs are getting messy. His partner's more problematic. Eventually, he'll create a crisis I can't contain. So you're waiting for him to self-destruct. I'm managing risk until the cost-benefit analysis shifts. She tilted her head slightly. But you've changed the calculation. This documentation of the affair with Catalina, if there are copies, if it became public, it would give me leverage for a fault-based divorce without the girls blaming me. I didn't know the extent of it until evidence emerged. Plausible deniability. Barrett had anticipated this. The documentation exists. Multiple copies secured safely. And you provide it to me when I have answers about what really happened to Catalina. How would I get those answers? Jamal talks to you. Maybe not about everything, but about enough. You've been married 22 years. You know how he thinks, what he's capable of. And you have access to his connections. Horacio Haney, Christopher Foley. Dolores's expression sharpened. You've done thorough research. I'm motivated. Why? Your brother's wife is dead. Proving Jamal's culpability won't change that. It won't help your brother or your nephew. It will give Milan the truth when he's old enough to understand it. And it will ensure Jamal faces consequences. Justice. Dolores said it like she was tasting an unfamiliar food. You're an idealist. I'm a craftsman. I believe in precision and proper conclusions. She smiled slightly. I suppose we both want Jamal held accountable, just for different reasons. I want him out of my life without damaging my daughters. You want him punished for what happened to Catalina. Can you help me? Dolores considered. Jamal keeps a safe in his home office. I've never asked what's in it. Plausible deniability again. But I have the combination. I could look, see if there's anything relevant. That will be useful. If I do this, and if I find something, you'll provide me with the complete documentation? Everything Catalina compiled. Yes. And you'll testify, if necessary, about what you saw the day she died? If necessary. Dolores extended her hand. Then we have an agreement, Mr. Olson. Barrett shook it, sealing a partnership with a woman he didn't particularly like, but deeply respected. They were both using each other, both pursuing separate goals that temporarily aligned. It was honest in its way. 3 days later, Dolores called. The safe contained several things. Business documents, some cash, and a burner phone. I checked the phone's call history. There are several calls to a number registered to Christopher Foley, including one the day before Catalina died and 2 in the week after. Barrett's pulse quickened. Did you confront Jamal? Not yet. I want to know what you plan to do with this information. I'm going to talk to Christopher Foley. That's dangerous. Probably. He's not someone who responds well to pressure. I'm not planning to pressure him. I'm planning to offer him something. What could you possibly offer? A way out, Barrett said. Everyone has something they're afraid of losing. I just need to figure out what Christopher values most. That research took another week. Christopher Foley was 38, divorced, father of 2 sons who live with their mother in Portland. He paid child support reliably. Barrett found the court records and visited every other weekend. His ex-wife, Tanya Costa, had filed for divorce after discovering Christopher's business activities included things she couldn't live with. But Christopher had been careful during the divorce. He'd accepted a moderate settlement, maintained amicable relations with Tanya, and prioritized access to his sons above financial considerations. The sons were his vulnerability. Barrett made contact through Benny Kidd, who arranged a meeting at a bar in Medford. Christopher arrived exactly on time, a compact man with watchful eyes and the kind of stillness that came from control violence. You wanted to talk about Jamal Fisher, Christopher said, settling into the booth across from Barrett. I want to talk about what Jamal hired you to do regarding Catalina Marshall. I don't know what you're talking about. You're connected to Jamal through your father Horacio. Jamal called you the day before Catalina died. He called you twice more in the week after. I'm assuming he hired you to handle a problem. Christopher sipped his beer. That's an interesting theory. It's not a theory. It's a pattern. Jamal was being blackmailed by Catalina. She threatened to expose their affair and destroy his marriage. He threatened her back, said he was connected to people who handle problems. That's you. He hired you to scare her, or threaten her, or possibly hurt her. You're speculating. Am I? Barrett leaned forward. Because here's what I think happened. Jamal hired you to intimidate Catalina. Maybe you were supposed to have a conversation with her, make sure she understood the consequences of not backing down. But something went wrong. Either you got too aggressive, or Jamal did, or Catalina panicked. However it happened, she ended up going through a window. That's a hell of an accusation. I'm not accusing you of murder. I think it was an accident, a job that escalated beyond what anyone intended. But Jamal's covering it up and you're exposed. Christopher's expression remained neutral, but his fingers tightened on his beer bottle. What do you want? The truth. What really happened that day? And if I tell you, then I make sure the evidence that comes to light points at Jamal, not you. I have documentation of his affair with Catalina, proof of his threats, and evidence of his calls to you. I can construct a narrative where you were hired under false pretenses, where Jamal's the primary actor and you're a peripheral figure. You'd protect me. I position you correctly. You didn't kill Catalina, but you know who did, or at least how it happened. Give me that information, and I'll make sure you stay clear when this comes down. Christopher was silent for a long time. Barrett could see the calculation happening. Risk versus reward, exposure versus protection. Jamal hired me to have a conversation with her. Christopher said finally. Just a conversation. Make it clear that following through on her threats would have serious consequences. I wasn't supposed to hurt her, to scare her. But Jamal was there when I arrived. He told me to meet him at the house, that he'd let me in, we'd talk to her together. When I got there, he was already upstairs with her. I heard them arguing. By the time I made it to the bedroom, she was going through the window. Barrett's blood went cold. You saw him push her? I saw her going through. Whether he pushed or she fell backward, trying to get away from him, I don't know. It happened fast. She was there, then she wasn't. What did Jamal say? He panicked. Said it was an accident, that she'd lunged at him and he'd pushed her back reflexively. Said we had to make it look like she fell while drunk. I told him I wasn't part of this, that I'd been hired for a conversation, not a cover-up. He said I was already involved, that I'd been in the house, that if the truth came out, I'd go down too. So you help him stage it. I left, told him to figure it out himself. But when I heard he tried to make it look like an accident, I kept quiet. He was right. I'd been there. My involvement wouldn't look good. Barrett processed this. Jamal had been there when Catalina went through the window. Whether he'd pushed her deliberately or she'd fallen during confrontation, he was directly responsible. I need you to testify to this. Christopher laughed harshly. Testify? You think I'm going to walk into court and admit I was hired to intimidate someone who ended up dead? You testify that you were hired for a conversation, that Jamal misrepresented the situation, and that you witnessed the confrontation. You didn't participate in her death. You're a witness. I'm an accomplice to whatever happened after. I knew Jamal was covering it up and said nothing. You say nothing, and Jamal walks free. You testify, and you have immunity in exchange for cooperation. I have connections, people who can make that deal happen. This was partially a bluff. Barrett knew Detective Riddle, but he didn't control prosecutorial decisions. Still, Christopher didn't need to know the limits of Barrett's influence. I need to think about this, Christopher said. You have 48 hours. After that, I go to the police with everything I have, including your connection to Jamal and your presence at the scene. You can be a witness or a co-defendant. Your choice. Christopher left without another word. Barrett sat in the booth, hands trembling slightly from adrenaline. He'd just backed a dangerous man into a corner, gambling that fear of exposure would overcome loyalty or self-preservation. Now he needed to make sure his leverage was as strong as he'd implied. He called Dolores Fisher. I need you to do something for me, he said when she answered. And it's going to require you to finally confront Jamal. I'm listening. Barrett explained what he needed. It was a long silence. That's quite a risk, Dolores said eventually. It's also your best opportunity to end this marriage on your terms, with your daughter's sympathy rather than their resentment. You're a manipulative man, Mr. Olson. I learned from watching you. She laughed softly. Fair enough. I'll do it. But you need to deliver on your end, complete documentation, and Christopher's testimony. 48 hours. Barrett ended the call and drove home. Milan was with the daycare provider who'd agreed to extended hours. Barrett sat in his workshop, surrounded by half-finished projects, and thought about the pieces moving into position. He was close. So close to the truth, to justice, to the kind of precise conclusion that matched his understanding of how the world should work. But he also knew that the next 48 hours would determine whether everything came together cleanly or shattered into irreparable fragments.